listening to Give God 90, where we're not afraid of the tough biblical questions, because we will dig through the language, the culture, and the history to find the truth revealed in the words of our Creator.
I wanna see the light.
Well, hello, everyone. Happy Thursday if you're listening live. If you are listening some other time, happy whenever, I guess is a good way to say that. My name's Jerry Mitchell, your host for Give God 90. Sitting in her supervisor's seat, surviving my care, if you have been listening for the last couple of weeks, is Myra.
Hello, everyone.
She had shoulder surgery a couple of weeks ago, and I've been the caregiver, and I'm sure she appreciates your continued prayers as she has trouble doing average things. She's right-handed. It was right shoulder that was operated on, and she's doing everything left-handed, and what she can't do left-handed, I get to do. So that makes things interesting sometimes.
And you're doing a great job.
You have to say that.
No, I don't. But you are.
We appreciate everyone who shows up. I usually take the first couple of minutes to remind everyone, especially our new listeners, visit our website, givegod90.com. It's out there. It's the information on there is free. There's videos, books, all kinds of good stuff on there. Don't forget, if you like what you hear, hit those notification buttons. It boosts everything up in the algorithms, makes it easier for other people to hear us. If you'd like to leave us a comment, and every once in a while people do, the chat room's open if you're listening live. If you're listening later, you can still leave a comment. Or even if it's one of the archived podcasts that are out there. You had somebody comment on one from about a year ago, I think is when it was. And I still get notifications when people do that, and we appreciate each and every one who does. Love to hear from you. Love to see where everybody's from. I can look at the things I get from Spreaker, and they put everything out over a lot of places, so I know the majority of who's listening from what venue, and I know typically the nation you're from, and it looks like we reach somewhere in the neighborhood of about 1,000 people a week. So I know that doesn't sound big in the podcast world, when you talk about people, having millions of listeners, but I'm not looking for millions of listeners. I'm looking for the ones who need to hear what I have to say. And tonight is no different. By the way, if you like what you hear, chances are your friends and your family would. But more importantly, your enemies need to hear it too. So make sure you hit those share buttons. I'm gonna begin tonight, and I'm gonna repeat this later because it's important. I'm not going to try and tell you or persuade you what calendar you should use as we look at time. There's the Jewish calendar that's out there. There's a Rood calendar, and many, many others that attempt to track time the way the early Hebrew people did. And because of that reason, counting time in the Bible can seem confusing. Have you ever wondered why things just, they don't use the right date? Wouldn't it be easier if, like on July 14th, so-and-so said this? But that's not how they did things. We read about days beginning at sundown, months beginning with the sighting of the new moon, and we're told to look for these signs. We're supposed to be paying attention. If we're paying attention to the things that the Creator puts out there for us to look at, then chances are we're paying attention to Him, right? That's why we're told to look for the signs. Today we have watches and calendars to track time. Well, most of us probably use our phones, but I'm not going to get into that. But because people travel longer distances today, we needed a way to standardize the way we do track time. Now, just over a century ago, towns and cities would set their own time. One person would make sure that the official town clock was right at noon, both hands pointed straight up when the sun was in its highest point each day. Obviously, that's going to change as the seasons change just a little bit, right? But in the late 1800s, there was a group of scientists that came up with a new system. It was called time zones, and it was a way to standardize time. They looked at a map and said, well, if we divide it this way, according to the way the Earth moves, we can do that. So these lines begin at Greenwich, which is a suburb of London. Now, we often call it UTC, or Coordinated Universal Time today, but for many years it was Greenwich Mean Time. Now, not every country actually began using these new time zones right away. They wanted to be independent. And very large nations like China wanted all of the entire nation to be in one standard time across the whole country. So as large as China is, it could be day or dawn maybe at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock in the morning in the eastern part of the nation. But at 6 o'clock, it was still very, very dark in the western part. So things were kind of strange, the larger the nation would be that tried to do this. Now, if you really want to throw in some confusion, daylight savings time took place. And when daylight savings time was used in many countries, it threw off everything. People actually had to calculate when things happened and when things were supposed to happen. Now, our Creator describes a calendar in many places through the books of Moses, and we're going to look at just a few, if Myra would read those. This is the easy part for today, guys.
And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And the evening and the morning were the first day. Genesis 1:5. And God said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. Genesis 1:14. This month shall be unto you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you. Exodus 12:2. Observe the month of Abib, and keep the Passover unto the Lord thy God. For in the month of Abib the Lord thy God brought thee forth out of Egypt by night. Deuteronomy 16:1.
Yeah, I had her read that from King James for a reason. We see that the reason the biblical days begin at sunset is because there was evening and then there was morning. The Creator begins to create in darkness and said, let there be light. That means that everything begins in the darkness. We start out in the dark, not knowing. And then there's light. We can see what's around us. The next day is described the same way. There was evening and there was morning. That's not changed since the Creator spoke this universe into existence. And the next thing we see is the sun and the moon and the stars are there to show us things. They mark time for us. They mark time for the seasons. And in this verse, the word seasons actually refers to appointed times. And those appointed times that he would establish, he designed and established before he created Adam. Later in Leviticus 23, these appointed times are actually referred to as rehearsals, and that's why Paul is able to write in Hebrews that the law has in it shadows of good things to come. We look for the signs that indicate the appointed times, and then we rehearse the things here on earth that our Creator will clarify and make understandable for us later. Now, the spring of the year, the month that the mixed multitude left Egypt, is supposed to be the first month of the year for the Hebrew people. Now that seems like a little bit of a change, but why? Even when James Ussher wrote his Annals of the World, he calculated the first day of creation would have actually been in the fall based on what's in the Bible. And many ancient cultures began their year in the fall. Now, this is before Rome and the Saturnalia and all of that. But, we could actually speculate that the lessons that were passed along by the children of Noah indicated that because the world was created in the fall, it just made sense to begin their calculations in the fall. However, after the flood, the growing seasons became extremely important because food is mankind's priority. No food, no life, right? It just makes more sense to consider the spring to be the beginning because that's when the ground is prepared for planting. That's when most livestock is actually designed to be born, is in the spring. So in the spring is a time of renewal. It comes back. What seemed to be gone returns. What seemed to be dead comes alive. Now, there are a lot of people today who recognize that the biblical calendar given to us by our Creator is more accurate and offers us a much better way to track time than the Gregorian calendar we use today. Some even want to return to using the biblical calendar. And again, I'm not going to try to convince you which one to use. I'm not going to suggest one's better than the other because that's not what we're here for. You should be able to choose for yourselves. I want to look at this from a little bit of a different point of view. And that is it possible to switch to a biblical calendar worldwide? Well, probably not, at least not yet. There's going to be a lot of nations who reject using what they would consider a Jewish calendar to track time, even though it wouldn't be actually Jewish. It would actually be the Creator's calendar that he designed, right? Other might just reject it because it's biblical, and they don't want anything at all to do with the Bible. They don't want anything to indicate that there was a Creator who designed the universe. So we should probably be content to understand that counting time with the Creator's calendar is kind of like a couple of different things. It's kind of like living in a land where your native language is rarely spoken. You need to speak the language used while you're there. But in your mind, you understand what's going on, what's happening, what's being said, in what would typically be your more comfortable language. Now, believers can also look at it this way, and here's where we're going with this. They can view the calendar as if they are living in exile, much like the Hebrew people did when they were in Babylon during the Babylonian exile. They needed to remain as faithful as they could to the Creator while attempting to survive. And not just survive. We have some examples, and some of the best examples of not only surviving but thriving are actually found in the book of Daniel. So Myra's going to read some of Daniel chapter 1 with some of the fun names that go with it.
The king gave the young men a certain amount of food and wine every day. That was the same kind of food that the king ate. They were to be trained for 3 years. Then the young men would become servants of the king of Babylon. Among those young men were some of the people of Judah. These were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Then Ashpenaz, the chief officer, gave them Babylonian names. Daniel's new name was Belshazzar. Hananiah's was Shadrach. Mishael's was Meshach. And Azariah's new name was Abednego. Daniel decided not to eat the king's food and wine because that would make him unclean. So he asked Ashpenaz for permission not to make himself unclean in this way. God made Ashpenaz want to be kind and merciful to Daniel, but Ashpenaz said to Daniel, I am afraid of my master the king. He ordered me to give you this food and drink. If you do not eat this food, you will begin to look worse than the other young men your age. The king will see this, and he will cut off my head because of you. Ashpenaz had ordered a guard to watch Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Daniel said to the guard, please give us this test for 10 days, but don't give us anything but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then after 10 days, compare us to the other young men who eat the king's food. See for yourself who looks healthier. Then you judge for yourself how you want to treat us, your servants. So the guard agreed to test them for 10 days. After 10 days, they looked very healthy. They looked better than all the young men who ate the king's food. So the guard took away the king's special food and wine. He gave Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah vegetables instead. Daniel 1, 5-16.
Sometimes you wonder, couldn't they be named Fred and Frank? But we do the best. You do the best you can with what you got if you're not a native speaker, right?
Right.
So this is just one example of how the Hebrew people didn't just survive, but some were actually able to thrive during the Babylonian exile. They remained as faithful as possible. They didn't give up. They didn't just accept their fate. Instead, they chose to trust their Creator completely. Again, I'm not going to tell you which biblical calendar to track time. I don't need to. You can read the accounts of how time was calculated. But more importantly, you can look around you. You can look at the night sky to see what phase the moon is in. You can watch how the light changes as the Earth's shadow makes it appear to go from new to full and then back. Even our most light-polluted cities, the moon is visible, and it can be used to track months and days. Now, if you want some extra fun, compare the Creator's calendar to the one we use today, the Gregorian calendar. And a short side note here. Even though the months and the years may have changed, other calendars and because of wars and politics, edicts, the Gregorian calendar is far less than perfect. The months may have changed, the years may have changed, but the order of days has remained the same. It has never changed, not since creation. And the evening and the morning made the first day has the order of days changed. Even Noah kept track of time on the ark. 40 days it rained. How do we know? Because it's written. Genesis 7 says, 7 days from now, I will send rain on the earth. It will rain 40 days and 40 nights. I will destroy from the earth every living thing that I made. That is every living thing that he made. It actually didn't do the ground any good either. Everything that had been built was torn down. Everything was destroyed. And as wicked as people were, at the time of Noah, they had not forgotten that time actually played an important part of their lives. The tracking of time was indeed counted by the early inhabitants of Earth. Although there was no formal reason to establish a calendar, what we think of as a calendar, what we see is that everybody knew what a day was, and everyone accepted that an order of days had been previously established. We only have a small glimpse of how evil the people were because we really don't need to know everything they did. We don't really need to know everything that was going on. We can guess, we can speculate, and as bad as we think it might have been, it was probably worse because we're comparing it to the world we live in right now. But later on, we actually have a more in-depth look at how evil the descendants of Noah were on the plains of Shinar, and we've talked about that in previous episodes. And that's kind of for a different lesson too. But back to the question, should we attempt to apply a biblical calendar to our lives and track our time using only that? Well, kinda. It does connect us back to the spirit of the Creator. When we search for the signs that He wants us to see, when we take the time to look at His creation, look at the things He's given us to look at, and attempt to understand what's happening around us. And it also brings a sense of understanding to what it's like to be living as an exile. Because we can't expect everyone else to simply automatically do things our way. We can't expect others to understand we can't expect others to understand if we say, we'll get together on the first day. Well, we might realize that's Sunday, but the person you're talking to might not realize it. Now, think about this, though. The way they track time in the Bible, imagine if you wanted to take an airplane ride and think about how long the reservation would be, right? Your flight departs, and I'm going to use some modern terms here, okay? Your flight departs during the second year of the Biden administration on the third day of the fourth month, near the third hour. What time do you have to be there? You ever think about that? But here's the other thing. If you leave New York, okay, and you're headed to Sydney, Australia, maybe your arrival time might read something like, your flight is expected to land in Sydney approximately 1 day after takeoff during the Albanese administration. By the way, Anthony Albanese was sworn in as Australia's Prime Minister this past May. Yeah, would that be confusing? If each country had to track time according to who was in charge and what month of their administration it was, and what day of what month. In the United States, and I think it's like this about everywhere, there's a lot of contracts, you sign your name, and then it has a date. And we're used to seeing that really little short line for a date because we use numbers now. How long would it take to describe exactly when you signed that contract tracking biblical time? It would be confusing, right? So while believers need to be aware of the biblical calendar and hopefully learning to start looking up and watching for the changing signs, hopefully you're reminded to be faithful to the Creator. And this just doesn't apply to the Bible. There are a lot of things that you can apply this to. Not only the calendar, but like Daniel began, here's what we eat. Later on, we don't bow down to idols. And by the way, I'm not going to stop speaking to my Creator. You need to do more than just survive when you're in exile. Even on this screwed up world we live on. Each of us have the ability to apply the Creator's instructions as much as possible to our lives. Not just do the least we can do. That's just in the United States we have a saying, that's a cop-out. It means you're giving up. It means you're letting go. It means you're just getting by. We all have been given the ability to do the most we can do. Sometimes we might think that we want to just sit and wait for the lions. Daniel sitting there. I can picture Daniel sitting there going, they must not be very hungry today. I'm not sure what you're doing here, God, but whatever it is, I'm with you on this one. Think about that. Have you ever wondered what went through Daniel's mind as he was sitting there communicating with his Creator? I'm not sure what this is all about. Not sure what you're doing. I appreciate it. Whatever you want, that's what you get. Have you ever felt like that? Have you ever felt like, well, it's so hopeless, I just need to sit and wait for the lions? Well, if you're faithful like Daniel was, you don't just wait for the lions. You wait to see what the Creator's going to do. You don't wait for the bad stuff. You expect the good stuff. Even when you think you're going to get the bad stuff, the Almighty Himself has something much better planned. And that's why we apply the lessons we have in Scripture to our lives. And that's why we attempt at Give God 90 to teach you how to do that. Not just getting by with the least you can do, but getting the most out of what the Creator has planned for you. Tracking time, we have to do things the world's way sometimes. And what brought this all about was I had somebody question this. Why should I go by a pagan calendar? The simple answer is you have to, because this is the world you live in. This is the land you live in. But if you're willing to know the difference, if you're willing to watch for the signs and be faithful and expect something better, you're probably going to get it, just like Daniel did. Did you have anything you wanted to add to all of that?
Thank you for listening to us tonight. And we'll see you on Monday.
We will see you Monday morning. Until then, many, many blessings, everyone. Bye.